God helped me by giving me a certain brain, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. The truth is, I'm actually a modest person, very modest. It's true.
Nobody knows this stuff better than me.
Nobody knows more about taxes than I do, and income than I do.
Nobody knows more about construction than I do.
Nobody knows more about campaign finance than I do.
Nobody knows consultants better than me.
I know more about drones than anybody. Nobody knows much more about technology, this type of technology, certainly, than I do.
Nobody knows more about technology than me.
I know more about technology than anybody. Nobody in the history of this country has ever known so much about infrastructure as Donald Trump. I know the H-1B. I know the H-2B. Nobody knows it better than me.
I know more about ISIS than the generals do, believe me.
Nobody understands the president, but I think I understand him as well as anybody.
I mean, I know these people much better than you do.
I understand things. I comprehend very well, okay? Better than, I think, almost anybody.
And by the way, who knew the other side of the picture better than me? I knew it.
Nobody knows more about environmental impact statements than me. And I think I know more about the environment than most people.
I know a lot about wind. I know a lot about wind.
You know, I know windmills very much. I've studied it better than anybody. I understand the power of Facebook, maybe better than almost anybody. I know more about renewables than any human being on Earth. Nobody knows more about polls than me.
I know more about courts than any human being on earth.
I understand healthcare now, especially very well. A lot of people don't understand it. I know the angles. I know every angle.
I know more about steelworkers than anybody that's ever run for office.
I know more about golf than Obama knows.
And, you know, in the case of Turkey and the Kurds, I could go into a whole story because I understand it, I think, better than most.
And I know all about it. I've known about it for a long time. I know the subject better than anybody.
I know.
This guy talks about, oh, I know Scranton. I know that. Well, I know the places better.
Nobody knows more about banks than I do.
Nobody knows more about trade than me.
Well, obviously, he doesn't know about nuclear weapons. I know more about nuclear weapons than he'll ever know.
You know Russians better than I do, Kevin, okay? I understand the tax laws better than almost anyone.
Who knows more about lawsuits than I do? I'm the king.
I know more about offense and defense than they will ever understand.
And nobody even understands.
Nobody's ever heard of testing in the kind of quantities that you're talking about. He knows something that you don't know. That I think I know, but you don't know. Nobody knew that healthcare could be so complicated. Nobody ever heard of Osama bin Laden until really the World Trade Center.
Nobody ever heard of the word trillion until 10 years ago. Nobody ever heard of the word emolument before. Emoluments!
You know, executive orders sort of came about more recently. Nobody ever heard of an executive order. Nobody knew that Afghanistan has tremendous minerals.
Nobody told me that. Nobody knows that.
I said, well, how many people die a year from the flu?
A number that nobody heard of, that I heard of recently, and I was shocked to hear it. 35,000 people.
What I'm saying, wow, nobody knew that information.
A fiancé visa, which most people have never even heard of.
This has been a Category 5, which few people have ever even heard of.
It was at 14 or 12, and at that time, nobody had ever even heard of Ebola.
You have caravans. Nobody ever heard of a caravan.
And human trafficking is a disaster. Nobody knew too much about it until recently.
Most people don't even know this.
And I've really become somewhat of an expert on it, I will tell you.
Most people don't even know he was a Republican, right? Does anyone know? A lot of people don't know that.
Things were discussed and learned honestly. The media didn't know. Nobody knew. They've never heard this before, and we learned a lot.
Think of it, 151 countries. Somebody said to me today that wasn't in this particular world, they didn't know that we had that many countries. A friend of mine said, very sophisticated friend said, I never knew you had 184 countries. We actually have more than that.
Some countries you never even heard of, we're calling.
I said, what's that country all about?
We learned a lot. We're learning a lot. We've come up with things that nobody had ever heard of, and we did it during this pandemic, slowing the spread, an expression that more and more people are thinking about. Nobody ever heard of it 2 months ago. Nobody ever heard of a thing like this. Distancing, social distancing, what does that mean? Washing your hands every 15 minutes, what does that mean? It's so contagious. It's like, I don't understand.
And nobody even understands it but me. It's called devaluation.
I understand money better than anybody.
I understand the system better than anybody. Nobody knows more about debt than I do.
Nobody knows the game better than me.
I know more about contributions than anybody.
Even the smart guys on Wall Street, and I know all of them, and they are smart. And who knows more about the word apprentice than Donald Trump?
I understand politicians better than anybody. Nobody knows politicians better than me.
Who knows the other side better than me?
Who knows the other side better than me?
I think I know more about the other side than almost anybody. And I understand the other side. Perhaps I understand it better than anybody else.
I was the fair-haired boy. Nobody knows more about it than me. I know more than these politicians. These guys don't know anything.
I know a lot. I know more than I'm ever going to tell you.
You're not known to be a humble man, but I wonder.
I think I am actually humble. I think I'm much more humble than you would understand.
I'm honest, I'm trustworthy, I tell it like it is, I'm here.
He's kind, smart. He's telling the truth.
And nobody can do it like me. Nobody. Nobody can do it like me. Honestly.
Nobody's stronger than me.
Nobody has better toys than I do. There's nobody bigger or better at the military than I am.
Nobody loves the Bible more than I do.
Nobody builds walls better than me.
Nobody's better to people with disabilities than me.
Nobody's fighting for the veterans like I'm fighting for the veterans.
There's nobody that's done so much for equality as I have.
There's nobody more pro-Israel than I am.
There's nobody more conservative than me.
There is nobody that respects women more than I do. Nobody would be tougher on ISIS than Donald Trump.
Nobody in the history of this country has ever known so much about infrastructure as Donald Trump.
Nobody's ever had crowds like Trump has had.
There's nobody that understands the horror of nuclear better than me. The sale of the uranium that nobody knows what it means. I know what it means.
I know the H-1B, I know the H-2B, nobody knows it better than me.
Nobody knows the game better than I do. Nobody knows more about trade than me.
Nobody knows more about taxes than I do.
Nobody knows more about debt than I do.
Nobody knows politicians better than I do. Nobody knows the system better than me. Which is why I alone can fix it.